Hola queridos, mi nombre es Oscar Adame, soy editor de Warp y hoy vamos a presentar una entrevista con Steven Wilson. Steven Wilson es un músico británico que a lo largo de los últimos 30 años se ha desempeñado como líder y vocalista de distintas agrupaciones de rock progresivo. Su principal agrupación, y la razón por la cual es tan famoso, es una banda llamada Porcupine Tree, la cual formó en los años 90 y que se desintegró hace unos 10, 11 años. Porcupine Tree era una banda muy poderosa que se basaba mucho en la energía de su acto en vivo, que tenía guitarrazos fuertes, gritos intensos y que también tenía canciones, baladas muy dulces, muy emocionales, que contrastaban completamente con este otro universo mucho más ruidoso en el cual por momentos llegaban a acercarse a lo que era el metal progresivo en lugar del rock progresivo por el que son famosos. Se trata de un músico que tiene una trayectoria abundante, que tiene una colección de discos increíblemente extensa y cuyos estilos rayan desde lo que es el rock progresivo clásico hasta lo que es pues el synth pop, el pop normal, el rock atmosférico. Es una persona que ha experimentado con un sinfín de estilos musicales. Sin embargo, hay elementos que nos hacen reconocer inmediatamente que se trata de un álbum, de una canción o de un proyecto de Steven Wilson. Y uno de esos elementos es su interés por los fantasmas. Los fantasmas, a su visión, son criaturas que son espíritus que están presentes en el mundo terrenal porque no quieren dejar atrás el amor tan fuerte que sintieron por una persona, no quieren lamentar el haber perdido el tiempo, se aferran a sus ideas, se aferran a lo que consideraron importante en sus vidas y a lo largo de su discografía ha hecho que estos fantasmas sean entes con los cuales es muy fácil empatizar. Es por ello que hoy presentamos una entrevista con Steven Wilson sobre fantasmas.
It's less obvious that it has a kind of story element to it. It feels more like just an atmosphere, and you're right. It has a more positive feeling to it. I think we were both aware, because having done so many videos together over the last 7 or 8 years, that neither of us like to repeat ourselves. So there's always a sense of wanting to try and be something different. And one of the things we'd never really explored was a lot of use of color. And also the track itself is quite different. You know, the feeling of the track is it's very electronic track this time. So it doesn't have the lots of guitars and drums and drama, you know, that some of the previous songs that Jess had worked on had. So yeah, it is quite different. I'm glad you feel it's different, because I think the one thing that we're both very committed to is the idea of not repeating ourselves, either musically or visually. So I like to think that this is definitely a step into something different, yeah.
It's interesting that you say to me, like right now, that it is like more electronic and that was the intention. Because I saw the interview that you were streaming like 2 days ago. And I think it was like very, how do you say? I think your focus about why is electronic music more present nowadays than guitar music, being that music is like a reflex of the modern times. It's really brilliant, but I want to know a little bit more about like, well, this has been like more, like, how do you say, like obscure times. People are more depressed, people are more like sad in a way, there's a lot of problems. I want to know, like, do you think that that's the reason why pop music is also pretty more dark nowadays?
I think I don't think it's just that, because I think it's been something that's been gradually happening for the last, I would say, since the turn of the millennium, since 2000. Gradually, rock music seems to have faded away almost into, I mean, I see this from the inside, because I'm still very much someone associated with rock music, you know. And I've toured during this time, and I've released records during this time, and I've seen the process, I think, that I felt began maybe sometime in the early part of this century, or part of this millennium, in fact, the 21st century. I've seen rock music gradually lose the battle to urban music, pop music, electronic music. And I like a lot of that music. So it's not like, I'm not offended by that. To me, it's fascinating to see how music continues to evolve and to develop and to change. And music that was once at the very center and forefront of popular culture and youth culture gradually is taken over by something else. And I'm sure people who loved, go back to the 30s and 40s in the previous century, jazz music was the dominant form of music, and that was gradually pushed aside by rock and roll and pop music. So it's not something that hasn't happened before. Classical music by jazz, and then jazz was pushed aside by pop, and the rock music became very much the dominant form of music in the 70s, pretty much with the Beatles. It was completely dominant for 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s with grunge coming along, and Britpop. But really nothing has come along, I think, in the 21st century to reinvent rock music and make it appealing again to young people, because ultimately young people is what drives the changing of the trends. And fashion is so critical to the way music evolves. And for whatever reason, rock music just hasn't kind of reinvented itself. It's not been particularly fashionable. It's not something that kids necessarily want to identify themselves with. I mean, I'm speaking very generally here. Of course, sure. There are still a lot of kids that love to listen to death metal and whatever. But generally speaking, it feels like urban music now has completely taken the mainstream. 100% dominates the mainstream. And obviously, urban music is very much based on electronic sound. Sure. And we live, there's no question we live in an electronic world, and we're surrounded all the time. Just the sounds that come from our phone or from our security system or, whatever gadget, we're constantly bombarded by electronic sound. And this is what my stepdaughters, that's all they hear, electronic sound. So when they want to listen to music, of course, they gravitate to music which reflects the sounds that they're constantly surrounded by in their lives. And I understand that. It's fascinating to me. It's been tough for me because I've, being someone that comes, and I'm in my 50s now, so I come very much from the tradition of rock music. So it's been hard for me to acknowledge that in a way to myself.
Sure.
But I think in a way, this new record is my response to that change,
Do you think that you are changing with the times now?
Well, I think I'm too old to completely change. I mean, I have a sound. I mean, maybe you'll disagree with me, but I think it's true to say that when you listen to King Ghost, it is electronic. When you analyze it, you can say this is electronic music, but at the same time, it sounds completely like me.
Yeah.
And the atmosphere and the texture and the lyrics and all those things, they're things that you would very much associate with my sound. So I'm not about to suddenly make, a real urban sounding contemporary pop record, and neither would I want to. That's not, I think it would sound quite pathetic for me to attempt to sound like, a 20-year-old hip hop, So for me, it's all about continuing to be aware of the possibilities particularly of the way technology presents new possibilities to musicians, and also to be aware, to be curious about what's going on in the world of pop music. I mean, you probably saw me on the Q&A talking about, some of the songs like the Billie Eilish song, which I don't necessarily identify with her as a musician. She's not the right age group for me. But when I listen to her records, I can really admire the production. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. And to me, listening to those kind of records, and some of what Kanye West is doing, again, someone I don't identify with on any level as a human being, but I listen to some of his records are amazing and inspiring. People like Kendrick Lamar, ditto. And I find myself listening to those records, and I can still learn, even in my 50s, I can still learn things that I can apply to my own musical vision. So I'm not trying to suddenly be like that kind of artist, but I can listen and I can be curious about those things and mold them into my own shapes, if you like.
Well, talking a little bit about vision, well, I reached out to get this interview because I wanted to be like a special for Halloween, and I know, yeah, you're pretty focused on ghost stories. Well, your last song name is King Ghost.
Yeah.
I want to focus a little bit more on this theme. Firstly, know like why do you think you are pretty how do you say, like, interest on the idea that ghosts exist?
I'm not sure I do believe they exist, you know. So part of me would love to believe they exist, but to me, what ghosts are more about the living than they are about the dead. And what I mean by that is I think the whole idea of ghosts is something that the living have created in order to understand death. Because one of the fascinating things I think about being a human being and the human condition is that we're very aware of our own mortality from a very young age. You know, my kids, even my 9-year-old and 7-year-old stepdaughters, they know that one day they're going to cease to exist. You know, they're going to die. And that's an incredible thing for a child to kind of have to come to terms with. And it's a really hard thing for an adult to come to terms with. And I think the older you get, the more you kind of dwell on what does death mean? What does death symbolize? What does my life? But really, when you're talking about those things, like what does death symbolize? What you're really talking about is what does my life symbolize? What have I done with my life that will be somehow immortal? And so ghosts for me become symbols. They become symbols of things like loss. And particularly, they become symbols of regret. What is a ghost? A ghost in classical literature is somebody that has passed on, but refuses to leave the world behind. And it's usually because they have some regret or some anger or some love that they cannot let go of. And I think that's such a beautiful romantic concept, isn't it? That love is so strong, or anger is so strong, or regret or loss, all those things are so powerful that somebody who is actually, their body has passed on, refuses to let go of presence in this planet. And I think that's a beautiful symbol of what it means to love, to lose, to have regrets, to be angry. You know, it's a beautiful symbol of all those things, and it tells us a lot about what I think it means to be alive and to be receiving this gift of life. I mean, I'm not religious, so I don't believe in anything. I think this gift of life is this wonderful random thing, a blip in time where we get 70, 80, 100 years if we're lucky, to make sense of this kind of random gift that we have to exist, to be a thinking, living, breathing entity on this planet, this beautiful planet. And I think ghosts, therefore, have become very symbolic of the spectre of the end, the death, the loss, the regret, the loss of love, the loss of hate, the loss of whatever you want. And I think that's such a beautiful metaphor. So part of me wants to believe in ghosts, but the rational part of me kind of feels a bit like God. I think God is another concept that human beings have invented to help us to make sense of our own mortality and to make, why are we here? You know, why have we been given this gift? And I think God and ghosts and all these things are, I realize it's just my own personal beliefs and a lot of people disagree with me, but to me, that's the way I rationalize, you know, this concept of ghosts and horror movies and all these things to do with our obsession with death. And I think they're all a kind of way for us to try to understand and unravel the mystery of life and why are we here. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Ghosts are like a figure that help us as human beings to don't fear death. Like, well, if you believe in ghosts, you believe that there's also something more after die. And it's interesting that you're saying to me that you focus on ghosts as a metaphor to tell people that they should, in a way, like do the things that they want in life, because
kind of. Kind of. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, the sort of metaphor of the ghost is a reminder of life. I think that's what I'm getting at. And it's a beautifully romantic. I mean, the concept of ghosts, of course, has been around for centuries. You know, most of the really classical ghosts, the 19th century. You know, you think of writers like Edgar Allan Poe and Arthur Machen and those kind of people, and Charles Dickens writing, you know, A Christmas Carol, that the most famous, certainly in Europe anyway, the most famous ghost story of all is the story of Ebenezer Scrooge and A Christmas Carol, which was written in the 19th century. So I think a lot of the really classical ghost stories go back, you know, to that kind of era. And again, I think the whole story of Ebenezer Scrooge and A Christmas Carol is that very thing we talked about. The ghosts in that story come to remind Ebenezer Scrooge to live his life. And I think that, you know, that's a beautiful way to kind of remind people to seize, you know, the opportunity of existence in a way. And I think so to me, ghosts have always represented that. But I love ghost stories and I love ghost movies, and I think a part of me still kind of wants to believe that it's something a bit more tangible, and maybe a part of me still does, you know. I find it hard to believe that when we die, we just disappear. I think there's always something we leave behind, some presence we leave behind. And maybe to me as a musician, that again is a metaphor, because I could say, well, my immortality, the thing I leave behind, my ghost is my work, is my music. This is like an imprint of myself that will always be there long after I'm dead. I hope my music will still exist as my ghost on earth. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. I understand very much. I read it, an author, how do you say, like an academic guy who analyzed narratives, Michael Cox, and he said that, well, that the death did not disappear really, like they keep on the memories of the persons that were the loved ones of this
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. So in that sense, you could say there is, even after we die, we are always present. You know, we're present in the minds of the people that love us. We're present, if we're artists, we're present in the work we do, whether it's films or paintings or music or whatever it is. If we're great sportsmen, then our deeds live on after us. If we built houses or buildings, we were architects, then I think everyone has some degree of immortality after they die, something they leave behind, whether it's their children or their work. And that, in a sense, is the continued existence of that person in the corporal world, isn't it? That is a ghost.
Sure, I understand very much.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said to me like a couple of questions ago were that you were, well, that this kind of work, these kind of stories are like a memorial to live. And they're, well, in a way, they are also a memorial that you are going to die someday, right? So I remember that there's a story called Wolf Alice about a girl who was raised by wolves, and that then came out to society. And the only thing that keeps her like being not completely human was that she didn't wanted to really know, to really think that there's death, right? The author was saying that the things that make us humans and the things that make us be not animals is that we are conscious about the end of things.
I couldn't have put it better myself. I've always felt that the one thing that makes the human race different to every other species on Earth is that we are aware of our own mortality and our own death. And I don't think animals are. And I think it's been, if you think about it, that's an incredible burden to carry around, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an incredible kind of mental, and a lot of the problems that human beings have, whether it's depression, psychological problems, anger, being unhappy in their relationship. A lot of it is to do with the fact that I believe a lot of it is to do with the fact that we know the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking all the time. Our life is running out day by day, year by year. So if we're not happy, we're also aware that we're running out of time to be happy. And I think that's such an incredible psychological burden to carry around. And that's why I think we invent things like, and we invent God, and we invent, all these things to try and make ourselves feel better. I mean, what could be more reassuring to someone who is not happy, who is depressed and they're not happy with where they are in their life? What could be more reassuring to go to that person and say to them, don't worry, this life is just the beginning. There's a much better life for you after you die. And you begin to understand how the myth of God and the myth of religion has been invented by human beings to make us feel better if we're not happy. And let's face it, a lot of us are not happy. Not all the time anyway. So I think the spectre of death is the number one thing that has defined the human race as distinctly different from every other species on Earth, and actually makes us arguably more prone to be unhappy and unsatisfied with the gift of life. And we're really getting into the deep philosophy here, but I've always believed that. Yeah, exactly what you said. Yeah.
What did you remember, like the first short story, the first movie about ghosts that really make an impression on you?
I mean, I can only imagine it was probably A Christmas Carol, the Charles Dickens story, because I mean that's a story that every Christmas when you're a kid, there's film versions, on TV all the time. I must have seen or heard that when I was very young. But I remember also when I was a kid, I was obsessed with, and when I say I'm a kid, probably when I was about, early teens, 13, 14, I was obsessed with ghost photography. So this photographs that had apparently captured a spirit or somebody that had passed on film. And later on, I also heard about EVP. Do you know what EVP is? Electronic voice phenomena?
Yeah, I think I've heard about that a little bit.
It's basically the same as ghost photography, but there's voices of spirits that are captured on tape. And I've had that. I think if you talk to any musician and you say to them, have you ever been in a session recording something and you've listened back to the recording and there's been something you couldn't explain? And most people will probably say, yeah. And I've had stuff like that, a voice on a tape I couldn't explain. Or I remember once I was in a session in a studio in Scotland and I listened back to the tape and there was definitely the sound of someone walking across the wooden floor in the studio. And yet it was like 3 o'clock in the morning and there was no one else in the studio except me. And things like that are the things that just make me doubt my own, certainty that ghosts are just the imagination. Maybe there's some part of me that still can't explain those things, and I want to believe in those things. And as I say, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with ghost photography, and I became very interested in electronic voice phenomena. Those things to me are really eerie and really fascinating. And one of the things I was really interested to hear was that one of the biggest investors in investigating things like ghost photography and electronic voice phenomena in the mid 20th century, one of the biggest investors in that was the Vatican.
Really?
In Italy. And it makes sense if you think about it, because if they could prove the existence of ghosts and the fact that you do have a life or that there are spirits beyond the corporal world, if the Vatican could prove, if the Catholic Church could prove the existence of these things, then what a great commercial for God.
Yeah.
What a great commercial for religion, you know? We can prove that there is life after death. It's the greatest commercial you could ever imagine for the church. So that apparently they were investing all sorts of money in research into supernatural phenomena like EVP and ghost photography, and I find that fascinating. Except I don't think they ever really found anything that was, you know, completely provable. But that stuff still fascinates me, and I, as a kid, as I say, I was absolutely haunted by certain images. I still have burnt on my brain that I still find really creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I'm running out of time, like right now, but I have one more question for you.
Sure.
At the end of routine, you sing trying to let go and never let go, right? Like in an opposition of what this girl feels about what she should do about, well, her lost children. I want to know, like, from your perspective, which do you think is the best election that she can make on both of these phrases?
To me, the interpreter, I mean, you can't separate the two phrases. I think to me they belong together. Try to let go, never let go. So it's this idea that through most of the video, most of the song, she is essentially unable to function because of the loss of her family. She is in denial. So she's pretending that her life is going on as normal. She's going around the house doing all the normal routines, washing, cleaning. She's pretending to herself that everything is normal. So she hasn't accepted. She's in a state of extreme denial. And what happens at the end of that song, what happens at the end of the video, is that she reaches some degree of acceptance. And I think the way to deal with loss like that is to basically say to yourself, of course, I will never completely let these people go. I will never forget them. They will always be a part of me. But at the same time, I have to let go. So it's like almost holding, it's like duality. It's like holding two kind of contradictory ideas in your head at the same time. And I really believe that when you deal with loss, that's kind of what you have to do. You have to get to a point where you can hold both of these ideas in your head at the same time. I have to let them go, but of course I will never really let them go because they will always be part of me. And I think that's when you have acceptance. So I think the nice thing about that song and the video is that it does go through all the phases of loss: denial, anger, and acceptance. And it's nice in a way that the video does kind of end on a slightly more positive note, because she has finally accepted that she has to let go. She has to accept this has happened. In order to, and in being able to do that, she's able to let it go and to move on with her life. But at the same time, she acknowledges, of course, I will never let these people go. They will always be there. So it is that kind of duality of being able to accept a loss. Yeah, I think it's probably the hardest thing anyone ever, will have to go through. Dealing with the loss of someone that you love is the hardest thing of all. Yeah. And most people will have to go through it several times in their life. Yeah.
I feel very peaceful every time I see that video in a certain...
I'm glad. Yeah. I'm glad. I mean, it's supposed to be, me and Jess joke, we were kind of joking about the King Ghost video because it isn't quite as depressing as all the videos. Most of the videos she's made for me have tended to be for the very, very, not depressing, but very melancholic songs about loss and regret. And, we kind of joked about that, but I'm glad to hear that also. I've always believed that those kind of stories ultimately are supposed to make people feel good, because they're kind of stories which make you understand that you're not the only person to feel these things, that we have a shared human experience, whether it's to lose or to love or to regret or to be angry at the world, whatever it is. We all feel those things. So sometimes when we see something like routine, I think it's kind of reassuring in a way. It's a comfort to understand that we are part of a shared human experience, and that we're not alone in feeling that way.
Yeah.
I've always found I've been attracted to the more melancholic side of art. I don't find happy stuff so tell me too much about my life, but the sadder stuff, tells me a lot about my life and about human existence, and I feel reassured by those things, and I hope that that's the effect that my music has had too. It sounds like it's what happened with you anyway, Bruce.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And a lot of your music too, like pretty much all of your albums. Well, it was pretty nice to talk to you, Steven. I hope to see you here soon when pandemic is over.
I hope so too. I always love coming to Mexico.
Yeah, it's really nice. Well, big hugs. I hope you have like a good night there on England.
Thank you very much.